Hey everyone, welcome to the Sprint 177 review. This is a longer than normal sprint because of the holiday break. So the sprint had ended on December 20th. So let's get started. For the overview, I'll do the overview today. For the UI, Kavya will present what happened. Adam will be up next with the providers, and then I'll round it out with the platform API and developer. The sprint statistics are from Sprint 177. Oops. Sorry. There we go. As you can see, we've had an uptick in the number of PRs merged this sprint. I didn't really look into the statistics. So I don't know exactly why, but all the other numbers look consistent. So we'll look into that. Closed PRs by label. As you can see, we had a lot of enhancements that came in at the end of the year, as well as a lot of bugs and refactoring. On the community side, we released Morphe Beta. That was released right before the holiday broke, and it was announced in the blog post there, as well as on Twitter and some of the other social medias. The biggest changes that we have are we have two new providers, IBM Power VC and the Oracle Cloud provider. In addition, we've had a number of Kubernetes providers to the existing cloud providers, including AKS, GKE, IKS, and OKE. We've also added support for cloud databases, including the databases on a number of the cloud providers that we have, and a number of enhancements to existing providers. If you read the blog post, there's a lot of information there about this beta release. We're hoping to get a full release within a few weeks or so. So if you can help us out testing it, finding any more problems, we'll get those bugs resolved before we get the final Morphe release out the door. And over to Kavya.
Thanks, Jason. This sprint total 7 PRs got merged into UI, 1 bug, 5 enhancements, and so on. Next one, please. Mingxi converted floating IPs form to React in this PR. Next one. Jeffrey added an enhancement to data table. Whenever there is just an icon in the first column, he attached icon to the name column to save some space. Next one. He also converted data store table in automate menu to React. It is plain HTML table before. Next one. AutoSD team added this new feature to allow users to create new host initiator groups on their storage systems through UI. So they added this enhancement to UI and they have contributed this one. Next one. Gilbert converted add and remove network router interface forms to React. I think that's all from UI. Over to Adam.
Thanks, Kavya. For core and the provider section this sprint, we added the ability to change a VM's description. So we added a VM description change operation. We also added a mix-in to make more consistent the way that refreshes are called on different objects. So for example, if you wanted to queue a refresh on a VM, you would call vm.refresh or vm.queueRefresh, depending on what you wanted to do. This was implemented slightly differently on a bunch of different types of classes. And so we converted all of those over to a mix-in so that it's consistent across all the objects that you might want to queue a refresh for. It also automatically handles targeted refresh if it's supported, which a lot of the other ones did not. So you can see those are all the calling conventions if you want to use those. Next slide. We added missing supports feature for VM relocation. This is if you want to, for example, move a VM from a host or a storage. There were some cases in Automate where this wasn't being checked; it was just being called blanketly, and without no blame on there because there was no supports feature to even check. We also fixed a bug with the EMS custom attributes collection not being scoped to a VM. This caused tags to be deleted if two VMs were tagged with the same tag, which is obviously not good. So we got that fixed up. Keenan also finished a big chunk of work to add supports create to EXE management system. This is essentially telling the UI what types of managers are able to be created and then updated later on by the UI and the API. We had a number of methods to kind of do this, and we've gotten rid of those and supported the more standardized supports create. Next slide. For Auto SDE, we added some spec test coverage for targeted refresh. They are going through and adding targeted refresh to a number of their collections and wanted to make sure that the tests keep up with that work. For IBM Cloud, Nasser has added metrics capture support for IBM Cloud VPC, which is a nice checkbox on the total supported operations for VPC. Next slide. For Power VC, Kuldeep added a great enhancement to use Terraform for building automated VCR environments. This makes it much simpler for developers to re-record VCR cassettes when wanting to update the tests. He also added a large number of advanced settings for VMs, which improves the ability of users to see into their Power VC VMs and see what details they have there. These are things that don't necessarily translate well to some of the rest of the normalized columns, but if you're looking specifically at a Power VC VM, you might want to look at some of these information. Let's see, for overt, we fixed targeted refreshes were not occurring in response to events. This was due to a missing configuration setting. And so fix is just to say targeted refresh is supported in the settings. Other than that, no other code changes were needed for that. For VMware, we now set the VM description. Before it was only set in the hardware in the annotation, and the VM description was nil. So now we're setting the description to the annotation, and VMware also supports changing the description per the previous slide. We also fixed wait for update storm causing backup to save inventory. We saw in some highly active systems that if you got very small updates multiple times a second, that persisting those changes to the database was causing it to get backed up due to all the extra overhead around save inventory. So the fix for that is just to wait a little bit to build up multiple updates before committing them all to save inventory. And that's it for providers. Over to Jason.
Okay, on the platform side, Joe added a change to upgrade DALI to 3.1.0. DALI is our Ruby gem that we use for connecting to Memcache. And when they released the 3.0 release, they changed one of the methods that we are monkey patching in order to support certain features. So he had to fix the code to actually work with 3.0. And then while we were in there, 3.1 was the latest release, so we upgraded to 3.1. Mingxi added a change to add supports attribute for floating IP. This is part of her general change to update the floating IPs page, as Kavya showed in the UI. That change, there's also an API change coming that is related as well. For bugs, Joe fixed an issue where in a pod, the home environment variable was not set. This is because we use random UIDs, and the random UIDs are not associated to user names, and therefore there's no home dir for them. Or rather, the home dir is /, which is not a writable location. And it turns out certain modules in Ansible need the home environment variable set because they need to write some data to the home directory. So Joe fixed this by adding the home env var and ensuring that it was a writable location. Kavya fixed an issue where the Amazon schema's STS token, when present in the UI, was marked as required when in fact it is not required. So she fixed that issue. Keenan fixed an issue where user widgets, when they were modified, would also modify the group widget order, which kind of doesn't make sense. There's no reason for the ordering of the widgets to move when you change a user widget. So he fixed that bug in the user widgets. On the build side, Brandon fixed an issue with the RPM repo includes. One of the regexes was a little loose, and it was matching different types in the wrong numerically sorted order. And so it was picking up the wrong builds. So that change fixed that. And finally, he fixed an issue where the subscription manager DNF plugin, while disabled, was still present, and it was causing some errors to be visible in the UI that weren't actually errors. So he removed the subscription manager DNF plugin entirely to remove those errors. On the API side, Mingxi added an options call for floating IPs. This goes along, like I said, with the change to the floating IP screen. So if you hit it with options, you'll get back the typical options response, including the what UI pages to show. Also added was the creation of the host initiator group. So a post to API host initiator groups with a payload like the following will create a host initiator group. On the refactoring side, Keenan made a number of refactoring changes to the API. I've listed a bunch there. These changes eliminated a lot of duplication and boilerplate all over the place and ended up removing about 1,000 lines of duplicated code. And finally, on the developer side, for enhancements, I added a helper task to regenerate the lock file for all platforms. This is mostly came out of the Morphe Beta 1 build. And we found that the lock files need to be built for multiple platforms. And remembering how to do that is complicated. So I added a task to help us for the future. And I also made a change to the gems pending repo to switch us to GitHub Actions. We actually pay money to Travis. So we're trying to investigate other CI systems, including GitHub Actions. So we made a switch to that particular repo, and we'll see how that plays out, whether or not we switch everything or stick with Travis. And finally, on the technical debt side, while I was in the GitHub Actions, I noticed that we had a lot of dependencies declared that were not actually being used. There's a lot of code that was removed from gems pending over the past couple years. And when the code was moved out, none of the dependencies were moved. So that removed the number of dependencies, about 7 or 8 of them. While it won't affect the final build, it will affect development in gems pending and the transient dependencies, especially. There was a number of transient dependencies removed as well. And that's it on the developer side. So thanks to all our presenters and everybody else who helped out. The Sprint 178 review will be in normal 2 weeks from now on January 12th. And again, I'd like to thank everybody who contributed. Thank everybody who contributed to the Morphe Beta release. Please go out and try it, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, by the way, the sprint review is next week, not in 2 weeks.
Excuse me, next week. This one was delayed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good one.